Fluffy food.
Hey, good evening, everybody. This is Rick Mariner. With me tonight is the founder and lead host for the Modern Carnivore, Mr. Mark Norquist. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Rick. Great to be here.
We have a great half an hour together with this Ask Me Anything, brought to you by Blue Nest Beef. And as a matter of fact, that's how Mark and I met. We had a chance to meet up at the Pheasants Festival, Pheasants Forever in Omaha, my first time up there. And we had the lucky chance of being the trade show booth right across from the stage when Mark Norquist was doing one of his many travels to these shows for hunter outreach. Exciting to have you on here, Mark. Really enjoyed the chance we had to talk almost a month and a half ago on your show. For those that are new to Modern Carnivore, let me tee it up for you. There's two podcasts and a number of video feeds that you'll want to look up under Modern Carnivore. That's the founding, the first podcast, but closely followed thereafter by the Outdoor Feast, which is actually where we had a chance to overlap, where eating meat responsibly brought us together in a conversation. I think was a powerful hour. But in addition to the podcast, there's a number of videos which I hope we can talk to Mark about tonight. But Mark, what inspired you? What got you started in this Modern Carnivore? I love the title. I love your motto: "Eating meat responsibly."
Yeah, it really started a number of years ago, and there was a moment in time actually in the industry that you're part of that when a bit of the light bulb for the model today came about, and that was being out at a natural and organic foods expo.
Mm.
And I saw a lot of great companies with a lot of great products, and there were consumers coming through on the trade show floor, and all the foods were primarily grain, fruit, vegetable, and I said, I love this space, but I think there's not enough emphasis on good protein. And one of the ways that you can get protein is through hunting. Another is through smart purchases. But it is, like you said, as the tagline says, eating meat responsibly. And I think in the context of where we're at societally these days, when you do hear a lot of messages that say meat is the problem and people should become vegetarians, um, I agree that there are problems with our production system, but I don't believe stopping eating meat is the right solution. I think it's just, again, eating meat responsibly.
Excellent. Well, that's the other theme that seems to run throughout the conversation is your work you're doing with both profit and nonprofit organizations to introduce hunters or new first-time hunters into this sport or hobby or necessity, and doing it in a way again that sticks to your tagline, the responsibly, and not without notice. Since last we spoke, you said you've been in Oklahoma, Montana, and even in, I think, Wyoming, where you were the recipient, first place winner for your podcast for the Outdoors Writers Conference. But what do you think setting your podcast apart these days? What did people take notice of when they bestowed that award on you?
Um, I think it's a few things. I think um, the subject matter that we're talking about is, how can somebody start down the path of a new adventure? Could be a lifestyle, could be a more of a side hobby, any number of different ways that people look at it, of where they would harvest their food in the outdoors. And so I think that is an intriguing topic for a lot of people these days. And it's something that can be rather novel when we have this migration overall with society and populations to more urban centric living and lifestyle, and people have become disconnected from the natural world and from where their food comes from. And so I think that the subject matter itself is very compelling. And the format I use with the podcast, similar to actually this show of yours here, is very much about the guest, and so pulling out what is their story. This isn't Mark talking at you. This is I've got a guest on, and I'm trying to understand. Last week we recorded a podcast with Orion Ann, who is a forager from Colorado. The week before we recorded a podcast. the gentleman who is trying to get rough fish reclassified as the same as game fish because he feels there are certain implications of this classification of fish that has negative consequences. And so topics that can be really different like that to some of the more pithy issues around, is it ethical to kill animals for our own nutrition and things like that. So I think it's interesting topics, and it's the way we format it.
Okay, it's a good invitation to go ahead and say how intimidated I am interviewing a host who has as many shows as you do under your belt. How do you fill airtime in a way that keeps everybody interested? I like what you said though, letting the guest do most of the talking. So I may rely on that trick. But you bring up an interesting point about the separation and perhaps the sensitivity people have to really facing their choices eye to eye. We were speaking as we were preparing for this half hour about a trip our team took up to the Outdoor Retailers Conference in Denver, and I found myself in certain conversations, especially in business to business, of reaching out for euphemisms because people I felt that they were sensitive to the idea of a kill floor, that the meat that we were putting into these products actually came from an animal that gave its life to do it. How do you guys broach that subject? You think about the sensitivity for especially maybe new hunters or folks that are coming from to this for the first time.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I have struggled with and thought about terminology like that a lot over the years, and um, there's no perfect answer to it, but here's how I approach it, and that is that the reality is when you're eating meat, is some animal died to so that you can eat it, and that's a reality, that we are killing an animal so that we can live. So we don't want to get away from that and try to cover that up or deny it. That being said, sometimes I will use the word harvest, which is a softer, easier term to accept. At the end of the day, I think from my standpoint, it's that I don't want a person to be offended. I'm okay if they're uncomfortable with the reality of one thing dying so that another can live. And that's a conversation that is a really interesting one to have, because that's the reality of life. The reality of life is that death is part of it. It's the end. It's at the end of our life, but it's also what sustains us. Something is going to die. And that's just a reality I don't believe we can ever get away from or should ever get away from, because I think it's just an important component of being here on this planet.
Mhm. Appreciate you saying that. It is a stark reality again for people that are coming to this perhaps for the first time and have chosen for a long time to look away from the reality. Yeah, I think it puts a compelling pressure on businesses. We feel it myself joining this company in earnest and focusing on the process of moving from cattle on grass into boxes of beef and sticks. But I think the compelling pressure is actually to do that as efficiently and as humanely, and I mean really mean humanely. We work with the only the best possible um, processing plants that have that reputation, and not just today, but forever, so that we can have a claim to be doing it in the way that doesn't play into the stigma and stereotypes that some of the competitors that do not do that have given our industry. It's one extra step though when we and I can say I'm a hunter. Hunting pheasants is something we've shared over the years talking about, or uh, and a few others. But the act of a hunter going out and actually killing it themselves, I'm drawn to your film Awaken the Hunter Within. I guess it's in multiples of parts on YouTube. You can find it under Modern Carnivore, Awaken the Hunter Within, where you take three adults through their first um, hunt. What struck you as you look back on that as surprises or things that you didn't expect that came out during the filming of that, which we know?
Yeah, probably one of the biggest surprises that came out of that, and I've heard many times since. We made that film, I think maybe 6 years ago, and I've heard it many times since. Is how people, in this case, Pierce, who was part of that film, one of the new hunters, when I asked him on the back end what was the most rewarding and important part of this process, and he said it was the butchering of the animal. And we do butchering clinics most years. A lot of times we do it out in my garage with a white-tailed deer, and I'm always fascinated by the people who are interested in coming to these events, because it is people, who are hunters already, who want to learn how to better handle their meat from their deer. There are people who want to get into hunting, they want to learn about it, and there's still a third group of people who say, I want to just come and learn about the process of how an animal is turned into meat. And I think that is the essence of what we're trying to do, which is, I believe, address a desire people have to be connected to the reality of food, and not the over productizing and looking away from the reality of what meat is and what food is. And so I think that's the type of thing that, I would encourage an organization like yours to lean into. You guys, what I love about what you're doing is exactly like you said, making ethics a core part of your process. And that's something to be proud of. And I think people appreciate that, and want to know more about it. And the reality is, I think in certain parts of society, we try to trick ourselves into believing that death isn't a reality that needs to be acknowledged, and that we can shy away from it. And I think the more we do that, the more people have a desire and a need to really connect with what that means. And so I think, to answer your question, yeah, it was the butchering and the interest in and the desire to butcher, which I always thought would be a really tough part, but it actually is very early on in the process of wanting to learn more.
Yeah, it's a very visceral experience, as those that have hunted and cleaned and prepped their own animals have experienced. I want to remind our viewers that this is a live event, and we have an interactive set of questions that are coming in, and one of them that came in while you were making that answering that question, Mark, was how hunters can make more use of the animal than just the meat itself. It's something that we've tried to tackle with relationships on how to place our regenerative agricultural leather and bone broth and those types of things. But at the hunter and animal relationship, what have you seen, and what trends and actions can you take to make the most use, be as the most efficient hunter?
Yeah, great question, Bruce. And so, you know, that is something that's very important. Whole animal processing and utilizing as much of the animal as possible. So let's go back to the example of a deer. Um, you're going to field dress that animal, and there's an opportunity right there to make sure you're not wasting something, that is the organs or the offal, OFFAL, and that would generally be your heart, the liver. There's also caul fat around the membrane around the organs, which can be utilized in cooking. In other animals like birds, you've got gizzard. And so a lot of those organs are an important part, and actually a very flavorful part. In a lot of traditional cultures, that was the first eaten because of the nutrient density of those parts of the animal. So that's the first thing. Second thing would be when you're breaking down an animal, all of the bones. With birds, it's easy where you've got a carcass, and to make broths and soups out of that, which obviously just creates such great flavor. I think most people have heard of that, but just utilizing the collagen in that bone structure and making sure you're really sucking every bit of it out of there. Outside of that, then it gets to more. There can be some functional aspects. So, like you said, leather. So, like with a deer, buckskin is a wonderful, although somewhat delicate type of tanned skin that you can make, or is great for making gloves and other things. You can do fur on if you want, or other decorative things for birds. A lot of times, a lot of people who hunt also fish, and so they'll use the feathers for tying flies. A lot of people have made jewelry out of them. With a turkey, you can make a call out of the wing bone of the turkey. So there's a lot of different ways to be creative, and utilize as much of that animal as possible. So thanks for asking that, Bruce. Great question.
Yeah, I think that gets Bruce ready for his upcoming elk hunt he's got on the horizon. I happen to know he's looking forward to that. You mentioned fish in there. That brings me to the second film that we spoke about, the three-part documentary where you follow three chefs through their journey through the Boundary Waters canoe area in northern Minnesota. Happens to be where we process a fair amount of our meat. So perhaps you can speak a little bit about that and what brought the chefs into this mix. I think I know the answer, but wanted to hear how you think about chefs in this.
Yeah, so I'll answer that last question, I guess, first. How do chefs come into this?
Hmm.
Um, Modern Carnivore, as a name or as a brand, if you will, is meant to uh, create intrigue and cause people to ask questions. What does that mean? But then it usually follows on with a discussion about food, and so we have a discussion about what does it mean to eat meat, and ask people, do they like to eat meat? Have they had a great meal that of meat that just stands out in their mind? And so it's a very universal thing, obviously, eating is. And so it's a great place to start a conversation about getting your food from the wilds. Um, and how that is sourced. Or again, if you're purchasing it, where is it purchased from? How is it processed? So that's why we have that name. That's how chefs come in, because then what we'll do is, in the film you mentioned, wake in the or I'm sorry, fish out of water. That was actually a film we did for an advocacy group called Sportsmen for the Boundary Waters. And what we did was we took three chefs up into the Boundary Waters. Two of them had never been into the back into the wilderness. One, Lucas Leaf, who is our lead chef, um, took them out and showed them how to fish in the Boundary Waters along with a couple guides. And then what we did is we cooked these amazing meals in the wilderness, where with fish that these two women caught, these two chefs from Minneapolis, Lachelle and Amanda. And it was a lot of fun. It raised awareness around some conservation issues with the Boundary Waters, and I encourage people to check out Sportsmen for the Boundary Waters if they're curious about it. But again, using food as a vehicle, where these two, for the first time, caught fish in this amazing wilderness area, and then cooked up these meals that were just wonderful.
Well, thanks for opening the door about conservation because it's a topic that we struggled with as we think about working lands and conservation, especially through the lens of regenerative agriculture, where if you can imagine normal processes in the conventional beef and conventional ag space have a way of depleting or depreciating those assets. But when we turn it around and work with the ranchers the way we do on these working lands, the well of diversity and value from that land springs forth. And so it's now taking a view that conservation is not a protect and set aside, but something that we can actively use as a working land or harvest as a hunter. What part does conservation play in the modern carnivore, modern hunter, do you think?
It's a very big part of it. You can't disassociate conservation from a hunter's identity. It's an
Mm,
integral part of it, and it historically has. If you look at the history of modern conservation, uh, hunting, angling has been a core part of that, of who the people were and what the people did related to it. And you bring up a really good distinction there, Rick, and that is conservation is not preservation. Those are different concepts. The idea of preservation is wonderful, but it tends to connote an idea of setting something off to the side and protecting it by not interfacing with it at all. And I think to your point, the modern carnivore view is that the best way to have healthy ecosystems and healthy bodies and healthy spirits and minds is to engage with the natural world, and that actually we can have a net positive effect on the natural world when we engage more directly with it.
Hmm. It does build an appreciation, firsthand experience when you're actually out in nature. And then you add the task of finding your own food, whether that be stalking or waiting for it. You realize that you listen to the world differently. You see it and you smell it. And if you're particularly hardcore, perhaps you're going to go ahead and fast until which time as you can find it. And that's funny how your senses will focus on that. Um, Something that crossed my mind as we were preparing for this was all of the tools of the trade, and again the when I think about eating meat responsibly, hunting responsibly, there are many tools of that, and we have knives or bows or spears or firearms. What role does safety and training play, especially for these brand new hunters? And if anybody's listening today that wanted to be involved, how should they think about safety and training as we look at this?
Yeah, safety is a core tenet of anything related to these activities. Probably more so than the others, hunting. When you are utilizing weapons that are inherently very dangerous and can can be dangerous, and they're meant to cause lethal harm to the quarry that you're going after. And so whether it's a knife, a spear, a bow, a gun, what have you, um, safety has to be an integral part of every step of the process. And so, before people even come into events or more advanced training that we do, we ask them to have their firearm safety certificate, which is a every state has their own sponsored program, and that they have that course completed before they come in. Because the last thing you want is somebody to go out and get into a situation where they're not comfortable and they're possibly danger to themselves or someone else because they've mishandled the weapon that they have. But there are a lot of there are a lot of other issues too. There's a lot of other dangers. Again, I always want to be careful because I don't want people to get too scared. But you're heading back into the wilderness by yourself. A simple fall can put you in the path of danger if you can't get back out of where you're at. And so that's why it's having the skills and knowledge to be safe, and also having procedures in place and a process set up so that if something bad were to happen, people will know to go out and look for you, as an example, getting lost. And so always, if you're going to go out, ideally go with somebody, but if you go alone, make sure somebody knows where you're going and when you'll be back, and that you check in so that they know you're back safely. Because safety is paramount importance on any of these activities.
Well, you're alluding to the fact that hunting is at times an individual event, but more often than not, a community event where we're learning from each other. We're learning where to go, what to do. Can guide each other, can train each other, can look out for each other, can check in. Hey, this person was due back from this river at this time, and they weren't. Let's go ahead and reach out to see if we can find them. On that topic of community, if I could shift the questions to the more advanced hunter. Um, what have you seen as some of the things that advanced hunters, folks that have either grown up with this or have now spent a fair amount of time, what can they do to help broaden the experience and bring people in? Are there any tricks that you've seen work well and that they can do, the more advanced hunter?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that we're trying to do more with people who have been hunting for a period of time, it could be a year, it could be 20 years, could be 40 years, is having them reach out to people and invite them to go hunting with them. Um, Traditionally speaking, we've seen a decline in recent decades of hunting participation, and that's due to a lot of macro factors going on, including the urbanization that we talked about earlier. And as tied in with that is a culture where we sort of don't we learn from our fathers or our mothers or our uncles, and then we keep it within the family because you have your special spots and you want to make sure people don't know where they're at, because that's where you have success. And so we need to shift that paradigm and get experienced hunters to invite new people in, and that's one of the things that's really important.
I appreciate this half an hour. It's gone quick as I'd expected, and to end on that note of community was really where I wanted to leave it, because I think our communities, those that hunt responsibly and those that want to eat meat responsibly, share a common cause. And I look forward to what else we can do in the future. And matter of fact, to celebrate this conversation, we have yet another code that our viewers and listeners can access. It's the same one we used on the podcast we did together, ModCarn80. Will get the buyer 80% off their first pack to try these Bobo Links grass-fed, grass-finished, and fermented beef sticks. What I would add is a light and 1 ounce stick that will be with you as a ready fuel for your next hunt. Mark Norquist, couldn't thank you enough. Appreciate all the power you bring into this topic of eating meat responsibly, and we look forward to future collaboration. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely, Rick. Thanks so much.
All right, bye now.